All right, everybody, welcome to this remote interview. We are interviewing heads of remote as part of the Head of Remote podcast series. And today on the line, all the way from sunny Malaga, I have Kenneth Hellem. And Kenneth, I have that you have now had this head of remote position at two different places. You're the chief people officer at Ultimate Beauty, and that you were the head of hybrid at Bellico. I hope I'm saying that correctly.
You nailed it.
So great, great. So I've just got a few questions for you about this, and we'll start with like really simple, just defining for you, what is a head of remote? What does that, in your experience, what does that mean?
It's interesting, right? Because I'll go back to the two roles that I had, and neither of those was a pure head of remote role. So at Bellico, it was head of remote combined with sales because they didn't have the budget or capacity to have a full-time head of remote. And now at Ultimate Beauty, it's a chief people officer, which basically means leading the people team, the HR team, if you will, but with an element of remote in it. So neither of those are full-time head of remote roles. But I do spend a lot of time thinking about it and implementing remote best practices. So for me, a head of remote role sits somewhere between operations, how we run the business, and people, how we make happy, healthy, engaged people. And when I talk about my job description, I say that my job is to make sure our people are happy, healthy, engaged, and productive while working remotely. So those are kind of the things I try to focus on within my remote scope.
Oh, I love that. So what then are the key, we say this sort of in the broad abstract, we're making people healthy and engaged and productive, but then what are the tangible responsibilities that you have?
Okay, cool. I think I understand the question. I think the first one is ways of working, defining, implementing, measuring remote best practices. How do we operate effectively as a remote organization? So that's everything from our communication, async versus sync, the tools that we use, and that all falls into, I'd say, the more practical operations part of it. So ways of working. And the second one is the softer one, which is around engagement. And that's defining our culture, our values, building community, taking care of people's well-being, which is more difficult and harder and more important when working remotely. And finally, growth, making sure that people are developing and learning the right skills to do their job, but also to do their job remotely.
Sounds like it has a lot of overlap with other positions. Like
Yeah.
HR is also kind of responsible for well-being, and there's other people responsible for building community. How do you define what the head of remote does versus what everybody else does?
I think it depends very much on the organization. What capabilities already exists in the organization, what roles are in the organization, what accountabilities falls on those roles. So I'd start by just mapping it out, saying that these are all the things that needs to get done, right? Well-being, ways of working. They could sit on various roles, or they could be grouped into a head of remote role. So I think a head of remote at company A is going to be very different from a head of remote at company B, basically based on what the organization needs right now and what capabilities and roles are already there.
Right, if somebody is already taking care of, let's see, well-being, like you've got a well-being guru already on the team, then maybe the head of remote takes care of something else, maybe
Correct.
focusing on other things. Right.
That's what I would say, but I would also measure how well they are doing it in a remote setting, right? Because well-being is very different when people are spread across the globe working alone behind a computer than if they're all coming to an office and playing ping pong by the coffee machine. So I think that skill set, you have to evaluate whether what you're doing today is the best way of doing things. And if it is, if it's not broken, don't try to fix it. There's a million other things we can fix.
Right. Right. If it's not an obvious problem, if it's not, people aren't in pain, then just like let it be. Let it be.
Yeah,
Maybe it's not the best thing. It's not the best wiki that's ever made, but it's being used. It's good. Let it be.
exactly. So
Right,
when I
right, right.
came into to Ultimate Beauty, I came in guns blazing, right? I had a million ideas of things I wanted to be better. I have a podcast about it. I've talked to all the experts. So I had a list as long as my arm about all the things I was going to fix. And they were all super important to me, right? But from an organizational perspective, maybe they weren't so important. Maybe it wasn't hurting enough. And one of the first things I learned, one of the most important thing I learned, is that the organization only has so much capacity for change, right? I might have
Mm.
capacity to implement 10 things in parallel, but if the organization isn't there to receive it, it's all going to fall flat.
How do you know what that capacity for change is? Is it a feeling? Is it how do you know?
I wish I had the answer to that.
Right?
I wish. I think, like with everything else we do, we don't know, right? It's an experiment. So go slow. Try. Introduce one thing, see if it works. Introduce another thing, see if it still works. When you get to your third initiative, maybe you're starting to get some pushback. Try to listen with empathy and figure out where is that pushback coming from.
Right. So I think maybe the most important thing here is to recognize that there is a capacity for change, that you can't just do a million experiments and hope that and think that people are going to enjoy
Hey,
that
trust me, I
experience.
tried. That didn't work. What happened is you end up doing 10 things mediocre and you're not getting the wanted results. And when you're not getting the wanted results, you're not getting the buy-in and you're not getting champions for your next initiative.
Right. I remember with one team, I'm a tool junkie, and I started experimenting with a bunch of tools because it was fun for me. And at one point, everybody pushed back saying, like, it's enough tools. Like we have to get our work done. And I was like,
Yep.
oh, right, fair enough.
Mm.
Right.
Like we've changed our sentiment tracking tool already since I came. We implemented one and we replaced it. I don't think that's best practice.
Ah, interesting. All right, let's dive into that because there is, I do want to talk about essential tools. So let's dive into essential tools. What do you mean by that's not best practice?
Oh, sentiment tracking is definitely best practice. It's my number one recommendation for a remote team. A sentiment tracking tool is a tool that does a pulse survey. Usually on a weekly basis, some organizations will do it less frequent, but it basically throws out questions in Slack or whatever channel you use. We have 5 questions per week. It literally takes a minute to answer. And those questions are out of a question bank. There's 120 questions. Somebody smarter than me made them up and categorized them. So when I get a good enough response rate to this, I get a indicator. How is the organization feeling? What is the sentiment of the organization?
Mm.
A score from 0 to 100, right? And everything above 75 is supposed to be good. We've set our target to 80 because we want to be better than good. But on a weekly basis, I can see how we're doing. And at our company, that's so important that we have that next to revenue on our scorecards. So the 2 big things we care about is how much money are we making and how is our organization feeling. If we have
Oh.
a great financial quarter, but the organization isn't feeling good, that was not a good quarter. If we have a quarter where the organization is loving it, but we didn't hit our financial goals, that is not a good quarter, right? So we put them side by side and we always talk about them side by side.
I'm very curious. You mentioned that you have a scorecard. What does that look like for your
So
organization?
we have many scorecards at the leadership level. It's the biggest KPIs. So revenue, sentiment. We have some scorecards around how we're running our business. For example, we're an e-commerce business, so we buy and ship stock. So we have KPIs around that. But if you break it down to each department also has scorecards. And for example, in the people team, which I run, a lot of our scorecards are around sentiment. So the big sentiment, but also broken down into smaller categories. We have one for well-being. How are people feeling? Are people healthy and happy? We have for recruiting. We have for learning and development, obviously. And each department will have their set of scorecards.
Who can see the scorecards?
Everybody.
Everybody can see all the scorecards.
Yeah. We lean in very heavy towards transparency. We want to share as much as possible. Our P&L is open. So we try not to hide anything.
Has that had negative consequences?
Not that I can think of, no. I don't see what negative consequences would come out of honesty and trust and openness.
Well, it seems to not be in the majority. Like it's not common.
That's a good.
So there's a reason it's not common. There is a fear, and you're saying like, oh, we haven't seen negative consequences. And I'm like, then why isn't it more common? Is it like a, in one way, I think of it as there is a new way of working, and part of this new way of working is not just remote, but it's also more trust-based because it's the nature of the way of working. It has to be more trust-based. So
100%. So you talked about the responsibilities of a head of remote, and I listed ways of working and engagement. Those are the things I do. But if we go a little more philosophical on it, I think it's more driving a paradigm change, right? The way we work, and I truly believe the way we work today is broken. I truly believe that we invented this 300 years ago during the Industrial Revolution, and it worked great when people were on conveyor belts. You had to go to the office, be there at a specific time. We had to measure your input, the time you were working. But we've evolved since then. Work has changed a lot since then, but we're stuck in old practices. We're stuck in a fear-based, control-based way of managing, and I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's good for people, right? If you look at statistics, 72% are not engaged at work. That's
it's
a
a lot.
crazy, that's a crazy high number. And it's an old statistic. I know that, but I don't think it's changed for the better.
It's never
Um,
been different. Like it's always been sort of,
yeah.
yeah,
And if that's true, right, we're getting work done and companies are profitable. So from a financial perspective, we're doing okay, right? GDP is growing globally. Great. Excellent. If that's our only measure, we don't need to change, right? But I think the measuring stick should change. I still believe in growth, right? We're doing more than 100% growth year over year. I love growth, but not on the cost of health and well-being. I think we can do better. I think we can have even better results if we create an environment where people are engaged and when they are happy and they come and they contribute even more.
when you see on your scorecards that people are unhappy, what do you do?
I hide it
What
so
are some,
nobody I hide it so nobody in
ha,
leadership sees it.
of course.
No, the
Change the numbers.
yeah, we'll just take it. No, the first thing I aim to do is to understand, right? If I'm seeing that the high level score, and this week it dropped from 80, which is our target, to 75, and that concerns me, right? So I need to understand what's going on. So in our system, and there are multiple systems for this, I'd recommend, if you're a small organization, a system called Office Vibes. It's very easy to set up and use. It's fun. It gets high participation rates. We've switched from Office Vibe to Lattice. Lattice is a more complete people management system. It also has support for performance management and one-on-ones and updates. So we made that upgrade. I miss Office Vibes because it was more fun. But these systems, what they have in common is they'll give you a score, but then they'll also break it down into subcategories. So I can zoom in, I can see currently 20 subcategories. For example, health and well-being, diversity, management, trust, uh, clarity around accountabilities. Right. So I can look at the categories and I can see which ones are moving. And if I see one that is moving in the wrong direction, I can double click on that and I can look at the specific questions that's built up to that score. So for example, under accountability, it could be that I feel my role is clearly defined, right? That score is dropping. Okay, cool. Now we can surgically go in and try to fix that. We can work with the team leads. We can work on our accountability charts or our org charts, and we can try to solve for the root cause, not just the indicator.
Seems like this tool would be very useful for in-person offices as well. It's not like you have the whole vibe of people there either, right? I mean, I remember being very unhappy in the office.
Yeah. No, the funny thing is we talk about all of these remote tools, all these remote best practices. I don't think any of them would be bad for in-office. I think these are just more sane ways of doing business. Documenting your processes. Yeah, that makes sense. Having a handbook. Yep, that makes sense. Measuring sentiment. Uh-huh. Finding better ways to collaborate. Yep, still makes sense. So I think everything that we're doing kind of in the remote sphere is highly, highly adaptable to in-office.
Yeah, yeah, it's it's a different medium. Yeah, agreed.
But it requires change, and people don't want to change. right? People like the way it's always been. It's easy, it's comfortable. I don't have to think or change my behaviors. And I think that's the biggest challenge why we're seeing resistance to remote, because it requires people to do their job differently.
Yeah, and there's a certain number of people that had very office specific rituals that were very important to them, like maybe biking together to the office with your spouse, or there were things that are just like I would never have thought of, that
Going out
it
for lunch, I miss that. I miss going out for
right.
lunch with my colleagues every day.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. Or going out afterwards. I mean, I had a thriving social life with my colleagues. Loved it, loved it. Still
Yeah.
have the closest friends still to this day, 30 years later.
A lot of things I love about the office, but nothing that can compare to the freedom and flexibility I get from remote.
Right. And it's not like I can't go back to the office. I have the freedom to go wherever I want. I
Yep.
think that, yeah, anyway, okay, we're all preaching to the choir to each other here. But back to head of remote, I want to, before we end our time, I want to talk about some of the challenges that you face with this. What's hard about this role?
Hmm. So we already talked about capacity for change. I think that's the one that hurt me the most during my first year at Ultimate Beauty. Um, the other one that kind of hurt at Bedlico, my previous role, was buy-in. So we had a CEO who said he wanted a remote organization, and our product was about renting out furniture to make companies more hybrid. So it was kind of part of our identity that we were remote. But as soon as it got difficult, as soon as sales were down, there was less and less focus on remote and how we work remotely, and more focus about let's get into the office so that we can all do this together. And so I think he saw remote as a fun idea, but he didn't truly believe in it.
Yeah.
So,
What
so
do
I
you
think
do then?
resistance and buying. So I left. But no, I'm somewhat kidding. One of the things I've learned is I can only do so much, right? I can inspire, but I can't force. So I will try to champion, and I will try to visualize success. I will try to prove it with numbers. But if there's pushback all of the time, it gets to a point where I don't feel like it's worth my time and effort to fight it. So where there is resistance, I would rather work with people who are pro remote, who believe in remote, who wants to succeed, because that's going to be a more fun journey. And I think if we start building those companies, they're going to win. They're going to attract the best people. And I'd rather be there than trying to transform something that doesn't want to be transformed.
Right. Oh, that's rough. They say they want to go remote, but they don't really want to go remote.
It's such a fundamental change. And it
Yeah.
comes down to really believing in it. We talked about control versus trust. That's hard. That's not something that changes overnight. I heard a quote: "If everything, if you only have a hammer, everything becomes a nail." Right?
Yeah.
And if you only know the control based way of leading, that's how you're going to do things. You might try something else, but as soon as it doesn't work, you're going to fall back to your old habits.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. And I think that's where we've gone. It's like everybody tried remote, and then for a lot of people it didn't work. So
Yeah,
we're falling back to the old habits of going back to the
exactly.
office.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it also depends on the ownership structure of the company. So in Ultimate Beauty, we don't have any external investors. Matteo, the CEO, founded the company and is the sole owner. And he believes in remote. He truly does. Right. So there it's pretty easy because we have control from we have support from the top. But let's say we now had a board of VC investors who care about the money, and we get to a bad quarter, they're going to come looking at us and provide help. That's what VCs do when things aren't
Right.
good. You get help, and they're going to see this remote thing that you're doing. That sounds like some hippie bullshit. Pardon my French.
Yeah.
And we're going to stop doing that. We're going to go back to what's always worked.
Right. Remote gets blamed immediately.
Yes.
Right,
Yes.
because it's like the easiest thing for some
Yep.
reason. It's like, oh, that must be it. It's not the bad management. It's not the, yeah. So not that we lost half the sales team. It's remote. It's remote.
So if you're driving that change and if you are stuck in an organization that might not believe in it and you still want to take that fight, all respect to you. I wish you the best. My advice would be visualize and show that there's another way of doing things. So one of my favorite books before I got into remote around organizational philosophy is Reinventing Organization with Frederick Laloux. And he talks about the evolutions of organization from we were cavemen until the Industrial Revolution. And then he comes up with two additional evolutions that happened since then. He gives each a color. So the
Mhm.
Industrial Revolution is orange, very hierarchical, money-based, control-based. Then we have green, which is more social, more culture-based, and teal, which is what he calls future organizations. And if people are stuck in an orange mindset, they haven't seen green or teal, you can't expect them to act from that. So you have to kind of show the way that there is something different, something better, and let them experience that. That adds a tool to that toolbox. So now they don't only have a hammer, they also have a screwdriver. Then you can start using both tools. But it is a paradigm change. You have to change their mindset before you change their behavior. And that's not easy.
Yeah, better to just be with people who are plenty of companies out there who have the right mindset, looking for help.
It's easier. I'm not sure if it's better, but it's easier.
It's easier. Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and when I go to work, I want to have fun. I want to work with people who have the same mindset as I do. And I think so. So my goal is to prove that this works at Ultimate Beauty. We're going to prove that we can provide an environment people can live their best lives, including remote work. Today we're 70 people. We're going to grow that to 200 people. Because if you're 70 and I say, look at what we're doing, everyone's going to say, Kenneth, that's cute, but you're 70 people. Of course, it's going to work.
That's
But
still impressive.
but if we can keep growing 100% year over year until we're 200 people,
Yeah,
right? Then we can tell a different story. Then we can say, well, look, it did work. We're beating you on all traditional metrics, and people are happier and healthier and more engaged. And then we're going to take that story externally. So Matteo, the founder, and I, we're going to be on TED stages. We're going to do the circuits, talking at conferences. We're going to be writing books and stories about this with the goal of inspiring 1 million people to do the same thing.
right. Love it. Love it. Woohoo. We'll be here cheering from the sidelines, from the podcast sidelines.
Nah, you'll be part of it. You'll be part of it. Let's say we'll do it together.
Sounds more fun. Sounds more fun. All right. In this last just couple of minutes, I want to ask you about the first 90 days. What are like the first things that you do as head of remote in an organization?
It's another great book on this. It's called The First 90
Yeah,
Days.
yeah, yeah. That's where I
I,
got the inspiration for this question.
I love it. The president of the US gets 100 days. We only get 90. Number one, listen. Listen to understand. Listen with empathy. Really, really go deep. Try to figure out why are things the way they are today? Why have they not changed? What's the resistance? What's holding it back? I do a set of structured interviews. So when I joined Ultimate Beauty, I interviewed every single person with the same list of questions. And I was looking for patterns. I was looking at what are people saying? What are people not saying? What's in the walls here that's not written? Just starting to understand where we are and where we want to go. And notice that was already a remote organization. So I'm trying to figure out what are the strengths, what are the opportunities to change. Uh, with that, I do a maturity assessment, and there's some frameworks out there. Google remote maturity assessments. I wrote one, but there are others that are better. But basically, it looks across a bunch of categories, and you can say, okay, we're level 2 out of 5, and it describes what are each of those levels. Don't aim for 5, then you're going to fail. Like figure out where you are, and aim for something that feels realistic, and make a plan for how to get there. Draw out your future state, draw out the plan, and then quick wins. Right? You need to build some credibility. You need to build some momentum. Figure out what's right for your organization in terms of quick wins. For us, that was sentiment tracking. Made a huge difference. It was easy to implement. It didn't require a lot from the organization. It was building a handbook. That was a bigger project, but has been a success. And finally, we were able to go on our first team retreat. That's obviously a big undertaking, costs a lot of money, but worth it every single time. So we did that during the first 90 days. I also tried a lot of other things that did fail, but getting some quick wins is a good way to build up momentum and finding champions in the organization.
Those interviews must have taken a long time. That's 70 people interviewing,
Half hour each,
half hour each. Yeah, that's
35
a week.
hours.
Yeah,
That's a week. Well invested.
yeah. And did you learn what you needed to know from those interviews just straight away?
Funny thing is, after 5, you're starting to see patterns,
Right.
right? After 10, you're not learning a lot of new things, but they're still worth it because it's such a good way of building relationships, finding champions, building my own internal brand. So
Right.
I would do it regardless. One of my metrics today on my scorecard is number of meaningful engagements I have per week. So I try to have at least 10 meaningful engagements per week. That's coffee chats or facilitating a training session or attending somebody's team meeting. But conversations where I can listen to understand what's going on, inject culture, inject values, and then help drive strategy.
Wow, brilliant. I love that. I think that's a great way to start. Ken, we have reached the end of the time. In fact, I've gone over. I want to thank you so much for the time that you've spent here. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. That was fun. Really, really appreciated it.
All right, everybody, until next time, be powerful.